All right, I'm just going to get right into it. Today, we're talking about authors who have transformed their bummers into bestsellers and what we can learn from them. I do talk fast. I also like to move quickly through the material, even though this webinar, technically, it makes me put it for an hour. If we can do this in 30 minutes or less, then that is great. I worked teaching the business of digital publishing at the University of Washington. And while I was there, I took an extra course that they provided for their instructors about teaching adults. And they said that when you're teaching younger people, they can pay attention and they can retain knowledge for about an hour. They said for adults, it's not quite that long. Out of curiosity, anyone want to take a guess and say what the University of Washington thinks the maximum quality learning attention span of an adult is? Just type it in. How many minutes do you think? 30 minutes, that's a good guess. It's half what the teenagers can do. Anyone else? All right, I'm just going to tell you, it's 15 minutes. We're only good for 15 minutes, so I'll do my best to keep it short. So a lot of you are on here because you are publishing books or you are planning to publish a book, and you maybe have had some success or maybe not quite as much as you want. If you're like me, you have grown up idolizing a lot of writers. Here's just a few of my favorite writers. And we learn about these people in school. We see them as we get older in the magazines that we read, on TV and podcasts, whatever. And it all creates this story of what it is to be an author. I would think of the authors that I admire and imagine that my life as a writer is going to be very glamorous. That my job is going to be to focus on the book. That's it. Really, maybe, do some interviews. It'll be great. But that's not really how things turn out anymore. As a quick challenge, here's 7 as some of my favorite writers. Is anyone able to identify at least 4 of them? Whoever can name at least 4 of them, I will mail you a copy of Austin Kleon's new book, Keep Going. So if you're looking at this slide and you can identify at least 4 of them, put it in the chat. Yeah, Renato got it right away. So there it is. You get the book. Please email me your address or DM me or Charka on the webinar. I'm going to write my email really quick in here. Kelsye at GutsyCreatives.com. So number 1 is Chuck Palahniuk. Number 2 is David Sedaris. 3 is Kurt Vonnegut. 4 is Arundhati Roy. 5 is Madeleine L'Engle. 6 is Marguerite Duras. And 7 is Stephen King. So here's my little image of what I thought it would be like after publishing. Great, very glorious. Maybe you had this idea too. And maybe after you've published and you've looked at your results, maybe you even had some good results in the beginning, but you're not a super famous yet. The feeling can be a little bit different than what you were expecting. But that's okay. You are in very good company. The whole myth of the overnight success is really something that trips us up. Now, it does happen. There are some authors that put out that one book and they have excellent success, and yay for them. That's wonderful. I'm really glad. But that's very rare. Even with the authors that you know really well that you only heard about once they became a great success, there were often years and years of work before that we just didn't see. That email I sent out had a couple of them, and these are fun, so I like going through these with you guys. Many of you know The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. No one would publish it, so she just self-published it on her own, and that first year she only sold 250 copies. Now it's past 45 million. James Joyce's Dubliners. That's another one that no one would ever buy it. And so there was a small publisher who took a chance on him. That first year, it only sold 379 copies, of which James Joyce bought 120 of those. So if you've bought copies of your own book, if you didn't buy at least 120 of them, James Joyce still bought more copies of his own book than you. It took 9 years before another publisher would give him a chance. And now that book is a classic. Lady Chatterley's Lover was self-published in 1928, but it didn't become a bestseller until another 30 years when another publisher took a chance on it. And in the more modern times, we've got Mark Dawson, who has all these wonderful thrillers. He first traditionally published his first couple, and he said they just bombed. Nothing happened. So then he turned to self-publishing, and he's sold a great deal more, and he's worked out a wonderful deal with the publishers, that wonderful way, if you can swing it, where the publishers are publishing the print copies and he has the ebook rights, which is a very good deal for authors. Christopher Paolini. So he wrote this book while he was just some high school kid, right? And then when he's 18, 19, he self-publishes it, because who's going to publish some high school kid's science fiction fantasy book? And he spent a whole year just doing everything that he possibly could to promote it. He did have very supportive parents, I will say. But after a year of just constant promotion on his own, Random House picked it up, and now he's the youngest author of a best-selling book. Garth Stein, those of you in the Pacific Northwest probably know. Most people didn't know about him until The Art of Racing in the Rain, which is a wonderful book. You should all read it. It's beautiful. But this massive success of The Art of Racing in the Rain was only possible because he published his first novel, which didn't really do very well. But after he published his first novel, he went around and did book tours. I think every day he did a different bookstore for 90 days or something crazy like that. And sometimes no one showed up. And he still went to the bookstore, talked to the booksellers, got to know them, made connections. And then when Art of Racing in the Rain came out, all of these bookstores felt like they knew him personally. And what do you know? His book gets put up front and starts getting that traction, and eventually became a huge success. But it was not fast, and it was not immediate. Austin Kleon. We're going to talk a lot about Austin today. He's the author of this book, Keep Going. But you may know him from Steal Like an Artist. What a lot of people don't know is that his first book, let's go down here, was actually a poetry book, and kind of an avant-garde newspaper blackout. And this was published, and it did okay, not stellar, and the publisher wasn't really all that interested in publishing any more of his books. And he thought, well, maybe I'll just never write again. But Austin now is a best-selling author of these 3 different books. When Steal Like an Artist was published, the reason that it was given a chance is because even after his first book kind of flopped, he kept working on his blog. And he'd been working on his blog, publishing things about writing, about creativity, poetry, for about 5 years. And then he gave a talk at a university, and that talk he turned into a blog post called Steal Like an Artist, which then went viral. And then he was able to get a publisher to ask him to actually write the whole book and sell it. But Austen is a very interesting story because even after he published Steal Like an Artist, it still took maybe 3 years or so until he could fully make a living as an author. And as someone who had written, avant-garde poetry, it's a really extraordinary thing to be making a living off your craft. However, he did have to expand his ideas of what that meant to include things like speaking, to include things about, writing about writing. But it's still a wonderful life compared to some of the other things that we can do when we really want to keep creating art. So this is our first key takeaway from the authors, is to keep creating and to keep publishing. And these things have to go together. And when I say publishing, I don't just mean books. I mean putting your work out into the world constantly. And this is a big deal. But you are all writers, you are all creators, you are all artists, and you have a lot inside of you, and you can do it. If you are creating in a corner, you're not publishing on a blog, you're not sharing it on social, or you're not sharing with groups, or you're not giving talks, then it's going to be very hard to attract the readership that you need. The good news is what you keep creating and what you keep putting out into the world does not need to be a polished novel. It does not need to be extraordinary work that you have spent all of this time editing and optimizing and getting great images, all of that stuff. Simply sharing your creative process keeps you visible in the public eye and helps people connect with your work in a more meaningful way. There's a good way to think about this. If you've heard me talk before, I often talk about Kevin Kelly's True Fans article, and this concept has been around for a while. The idea is that if you want to be sustained as an artist, there's a few ways to go about it. If you have fame, if you are writing on a topic of the moment, if you have some amazing platform already, then great. Maybe you're one of the lucky few that can just publish that and you'll be hugely popular right out of the gate. But that's not the case for most of us, or even many of us. On the other end of that is, well, if you don't have, a million readers right away, then maybe you could create 1 million products. And if you create 1 million products, then they can sell and, you can make a living. But again, that's not feasible. That's exhausting. So the true fan concept says that it's not 100 fans. That is a typo. I should really change that. It should be 1,000 true fans. That it takes 1,000 true fans in order to sustain a life as an artist. So what is a true fan? And how are they different from just someone who bought your book? Someone who bought your book, maybe you did a 99-cent publishing promotion and someone downloaded it from Amazon. Great. They bought your book. They are a book sale. They are not a true fan. It's a great introduction and it's a great way for them to get to know you. But that person is Amazon's customer. They are not your true fan. You don't have any information about them. And you have no way to keep in contact with them. You have no way to let them know what else you're doing or tell them about your next item. So a true fan is someone who buys not just one of your books, but multiple of your books. Or maybe they buy one and they also visit your blog. Or maybe they have heard your podcast interview and then they bought a book and then, later they gave it as a gift. True fans feels kind of weird sometimes on an ego perspective to talk about, because it's weird to talk about people being fans of you. But when you think about it, you're probably a true fan already of many, many, many people, brands, all kinds of things. And when you think about how that happened, you didn't just hear about these people once. you heard about them multiple times. Like I am a definite true fan of David Sedaris. You know, sure, I heard the Santaland Diaries first, ha ha ha, very funny, and I start to recognize his name. Then I might buy one book. Oh, that was good. And then later on, I see an announcement that he's got another one. I read that one. And at that point, I'm starting to become a fan. But over the years, you know, when I read, every time I see his name, I pay attention. And everything that he puts out, I just like more and more and more. And it gets to the point where I'm not passively just hearing about him, but I'm actively seeking him out. You know, he's doing a tour. Oh, where is he going? I'm going to get online and find out if he's coming to my city so I can go, sit in town hall and giggle my way through some really clever snark. I am a true fan of of David Sedaris. So he didn't just get a single book sale out of me. He gets multiple book sales out of me. He gets ticket sales out of me, all of these wonderful things. So your goal is to focus on collecting true fans. And to that end, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this guy. This is Guy Kawasaki. It was a really big deal in the startup world, one of the first employees at Apple. And he wrote The Art of the Start, which was a great success in the startup world. And he had published these books that had been very successful, but they were all tech and business related. And he'd been really disappointed with his experience with his publishers because they couldn't fulfill large orders. They just really couldn't do any creative things. So he started self-publishing his books. And he was really lucky that he already had a platform. He already had some fame to build on. However, then he decided to write a book about self-publishing. And he didn't have a big following of authors. And I was very lucky because I've come from the startup world and the literary world. And I met him right when he was publishing Ape, and he became an advisor for one of my companies. And he said, you should give a copy of my book, a digital copy, for free to everyone who pre-registers before your product launch. And I thought, okay, well, that seems wonderful and extraordinarily generous, but do you want me to limit it at like 100 or something? Because his book just came out. I mean, you don't want me to just give it away to everyone, right? And he said, no limit. And I was like, okay, well, then do you not want me to talk about it very much? Because I knew a whole bunch of people would come and sign up just to get his free book, and he would lose sales. And he said, oh, no, talk about it as much as you possibly can. So, okay, we did. And we had over 1,500 people register for our product before the launch. Mostly, I'm going to admit, because we were giving away his book for free. And then after that, we kept doing the promotion, and maybe 3,000 more people signed up just to get his book, and then became customers of ours. And I asked him, he does make a living from these things. Why is he giving this book away for free when he's also marketing it so hard? And he said that where he makes his money is not from the books. Where he makes his money is from the speaking engagements. And that year that he put out Ape, he also keynoted the Book Expo conference in New York, which is the biggest publishing conference of the year in the US. It's not Frankfurt, but in the US. And the reason that he was able to keynote that in this industry, in this space that he had no prior name recognition, was because he published this book and he got it into the hands of as many people as possible. Now, all of these people are readers of his on their way to becoming true fans. He's a very easy guy to become a true fan of. And they start looking at his other books and his other services, and he is able to get all of these high-level speaking gigs that provide the income that lets him do whatever he wants, which is to help people become authors publishers and entrepreneurs. So I want you to think of yourself not just as an author, but as an ape, as an author, publisher, entrepreneur. Expand your earnings beyond your book sales. If you write nonfiction books, this is a very easy concept. You can, create online courses around what you do. You can create services. You can create bundles of resources. But if you are a fiction author, there's also a ton that you can do to expand your earnings. Selling books where you might make $1 if you're traditionally published with each copy, or a couple bucks if you're self-published. The volume that you have to sell in order to make a living off of your books is huge and difficult for anyone. However, if you have some different price points of things where most of the revenue comes directly to you, then making a living as a writer around things that involve your writing becomes very, very doable. A lot of writers teach about writing. Elizabeth Gilbert does these writing retreats in Italy that are a couple weeks that you can go and workshop with Elizabeth Gilbert, and they're $5,000, $6,000 per person. That's a lovely way to supplement your writing income. But the key takeaway here is to expand your earnings, expand your definition of what it means to make a living as a writer, and then you'll have more opportunities for success. Now, all of this might seem really hard, and if you're like me, you have very little patience. I always think of Homer. I have an inner Homer Simpson all the time that's talking to me. I don't know if you remember, there was one episode where he wants to buy a gun, and the shop guy tells him, "Oh, there's a 5-day waiting period," and he says, "5 days? But I'm mad now. If I had my gun, I would kill you." Ha ha ha! Very funny. So, of course, we all want that instant feedback that when we make an effort, we're going to get it paid off pretty quickly. The kind of sobering news. Oh, I've just lost part of my. Please excuse me. I've just lost part of my control panel. There it is. The sobering news is that if you aren't already famous, or have a massive platform, or have $1 million to spend on direct marketing, you can look at probably a good 3 years in order to build up all of those efforts in order to collect enough people to get the ball rolling. The good news is that you really don't have to win every single person as a true fan. If you can get that core group, that momentum will carry you forward. It's like, if any of you have large social media followings, you learn that, man, it's really, really hard to get that first 100, that first 500, that first 3,000. But then after that, everything starts getting a lot easier. Once you're at 5,000, things start happening. Once you're at 10,000, wow, it has its own momentum. It starts growing on its own. The same thing is true with book sales. If you can get, a nice core chunk of book sales, that momentum can start to grow and start to build beyond your own efforts. This can be exhausting. If you're thinking of promoting your book, putting out content, putting out more books, also doing products, also doing services, and you got to do this for 3 years before you got to relax. And it can be pretty daunting. And I recently heard a wonderful podcast that had on an author, Dr. Sophie Mort, a psychologist, who just came out with this book called A Manual for Being Human. And she was talking about our goals and how goals are great, but they can also be very disappointing because there's so much that you don't control. Like, you actually don't control whether 1,000 people buy your book or not. That is completely out of your hands. Same as if a good publisher is going to pick you up, or if your publisher is going to spend a lot of money on your marketing. These are not things that you can control. So if you have, on your little checklist, get an agent, and it's sitting there on your checklist for, months, it can be very depressing. So the psychologist had a really wonderful way of thinking, which was change it from goal getting to living your values, which sounds a little woo-woo, but makes a lot of sense when she talked about, instead of going after that publisher, your value perhaps is creating art. Your value perhaps is sharing stories that create empathy. Your value perhaps is that you are focused on your work and you take it seriously. So every day you sit down and you are at the computer and you are doing a little bit of outreach. When you focus instead on living your values, then those goals likely will eventually come, but they also become not as important because all of that effort really does build up and really does amount to something. And even though it might take 3 years to reach that high level that you want, when you're constantly putting your stuff out there and your audience is constantly growing, every day is better than the next. Every week is better than the next. Your opportunities get better all of the time. Sure, maybe instead of 4 steps, there's 100 steps, but it's exciting. It's exciting taking all of those little steps when all of your speaking opportunities get a little bit bigger, or your clients pay a little bit more, or your book sales get a little bit better, or things just get easier. So focus on living your values, less the goals. The other thing I want to go back to, when I talked about collecting true fans, if there's one thing you take away from this, it's that you have to collect them. And what I mean by that is that an email to you is more valuable than a book sale, because a book sale is a one-off thing. It has a limit. It's great. It's wonderful, but its impact is limited. If you could instead get an email address of someone who might be interested in your service or your message or your story, that's someone that you can start building a relationship with. That's someone that you could build trust with. That's someone you can help. That's someone you can connect with. And then that is someone that would probably really want to buy your book, and then maybe your next book, and then maybe go with you to Italy to hear what you have to say about their work. So if you've published your book and you've done some promotions and you've had, your little blips of success, and you've hit some category bestseller and it was great and you get that high, and then, a couple weeks later, your sales are back down to zilch. It's okay. You've already gotten it out there. You've taken some great first steps. Now focus on getting those emails. Focus on getting those emails so you don't have to worry about always putting money into the promotion machine or always doing your PR every single week, because that is unsustainable. Focus on getting those emails and creating those true fans. Oh, that's a duplicate. 30 minutes, fantastic. So the bonus that I have for all of you is that in the email that I will send that follows this up, yes, you'll have a link to the slides, which are mostly pictures, but people ask for them. However, you will also all have a link to download Guy Kawasaki's book, which has very helpful information about self-publishing and also his contact information. I love working with authors. If you want to work with me, you have my email address. Please contact me. I also love sharing my community's books. So if you notice on Twitter, I have a rather large following. So if you email me a link to your book, I will be happy to share it with my community as well. And that is all. And I thank you very much for attending. And Renato, make sure that you've sent me your mailing address so that I can mail you your book, and have a wonderful day.